You know, a good reminder from Genesis chapter 1, verse 3 is God always pierces the darkness, always. And the darkness doesn't last.
And the high priest, the great high priest who is Jesus Christ, he puts his hands on your life and you take your hands off and you say, my life is surrendered for your purposes.
Hey, I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Downline podcast. I'm Jamie Trussell, of the privilege of serving with Downline Ministries for many years and now out in the Austin area at Redeemer Dripping Springs. Downline exists to see biblical disciple making restored and catalyzed and encouraged in and through the local church. And we hope on this podcast that you learn how to more faithfully walk with Jesus while pouring your lives into others. Today we're joined by Joey Shaw, which I'm super excited about. The Shaw family, many of you will be familiar with the name, as his dad Sam pastored in Memphis for years and has taught in our institute for several years now. And Joey, he's always talked glowingly about you publicly. So I think it's really fun to add your voice and face to the podcast and help people meet you in a more personal way. So thanks for joining us.
No, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Tell us, maybe, take a few minutes on the front end for those that may not be familiar with you at all, a little bit about you, your family, what you're doing now. You shared a little bit before we were recording about the kind of vision of the organization you're working with now, and then a little bit of your background as missions pastor and serving overseas, as people can kind of get oriented to where you've been with the Lord.
Sure. Yeah. Well, if you know my dad, Sam Shaw, he's my dad, and people generally tell me I look like him. So if you're watching this on YouTube or what have you, I know I am aware that I look like them, and very, very happy for that. I feel very privileged to be their children. And yeah, actually this spring I taught at the Downline Spanish campus, which was a real privilege. So I was born in Costa Rica. My parents were missionaries in Latin America when I was born, but just a few years into my life, I moved to the States and so grew up in a great home. Felt the Lord calling me when I was in high school, actually, to serve Muslims. And I really wanted to go to West Point, but felt the Lord calling me to serve Muslims. You know, the word that really the Lord really used was, and for me, it really spoke to me, was like, sometimes we treat Christian life like a contract that we fill out. It's like, hey, terms are good, sign on the bottom line, But the Christian life is not like that. That's not how God works. He doesn't give you the terms and then you sign, but it's a blank piece of paper. It's an offer relationship, and then we sign. And that God used that for me to break me away from kind of a certain trajectory and try to find a way to go to the mission field. So I went and learned Arabic in Arkansas. Actually, it's funny. One of the two things that the University of Arkansas and Harvard have in common is Bill Clinton and a strong Middle East Studies Center.
Really?
We have nothing else in common.
Hey, my wife is an Arkansas grad, so I'm a fan.
Okay. All right. Well, nobody at Harvard is saying woo pig suey.
That's true.
I don't think.
They would never dare.
They would never dare. That's right. So I went to the University of Arkansas and actually on an endowment that was originally given from the King of Saudi Arabia. And in short time began to do a few things, in the Middle East and learned Arabic and such. Ended up being a missions pastor in Austin, Texas for a few years, which is wonderful. And then
what church are you at in Austin?
Austin Stone Community Church.
Yeah. So Andy Campman really well.
So I recruited Andy. Well, the Lord recruited him, but the Lord used me to be a voice in his life to replace me at Austin Stone. So when we left for North Africa, Andy came and replaced me.
Okay, got it.
Yep.
Got it.
Andy's a close friend of mine. I esteem him greatly. I think he's a really wonderful mobilizer for the kingdom. Yeah, so then we moved to North Africa. Spent a few years there. I opened a couple of businesses. We're doing a lot of evangelism and mobilization as well. Opened a business in North Africa with people from North Africa, 2 different businesses.
Yeah.
So did kind of a combination of mobilization, evangelism, mentoring, and business. And then from there, we moved to Barcelona, Spain, where we spent the last 10 years. And we were part of a family of ministries in Barcelona, a few of them global ministries, where I was the, director of global reaching church planning or church planning, ish ministries, and then a few of them local, including a
Okay.
church and a nonprofit. So we operated in this family of ministries, and then the Lord called our family. Actually, Christmas Eve, we moved from Barcelona to the States,
On
and
Christmas Eve.
on Christmas Eve, and on January 1st, I started in a new role. The Lord called me to a new role. It's the Executive Vice President of Global Alliance for Church Multiplication.
Okay.
The Global Alliance for Church Multiplication, or GACX, is a organizational alliance of 115 organizations that has a shared vision to see a church planted for every 1,000 people on earth. So we're in Orlando now, and that's kind of our journey.
Thanks for sharing all of that. How has the adjustment been? I mean, you're overseas for so long, Spain 10 years, and then you land in the States, and I guess what? You're 6 months, 7 months in now?
Yeah, I've counseled loads of people who have made that transition. So, I kind of knew what was ahead, but it's one thing to counsel, another thing to go through it.
Yeah, isn't that funny how
So,
that works?
yeah. So there is something called re-entry, a re-entry transition. You kind of go through reverse culture shock. My children are what's called TCKs, third culture kids.
Okay.
So their native, kind of their culture that they identify with is neither the culture of their parents nor of their host country. So when we were in Barcelona, their culture, I mean, they're fluent in Catalan and in Spanish and in English, right? They went to Catalan public schools, and their whole life was in Catalan or Spanish and with the locals. But they don't identify with that culture, nor they identify really as a kind of a standard, from the United States kind of culture. They don't know who the founding fathers are, and they don't know the Star Spangled Banner, and they don't know what to do when this plays at a football game, and football is soccer, and so the whole thing is weird. So they're third culture, right? And so as a family, we're kind of in that tension, feeling like, okay, I know I'm from this country, I grew up in this country, but I'm still struggling to accept it as where I live.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
how old are your kids?
15, 13, and 11.
Okay, so those are some. Yeah, you've lived a lot of life somewhere else at that point.
Yeah, sure. They live most of their lives outside the States. Yeah,
Okay.
and the role that I've been in is a global leadership role. So they've had a great life so far. They've been all over the world and experienced so many different cultures and lifestyles and so on. But we're in Orlando now, so it is the chirpiest and happiest place on earth with all the theme parks, which is pretty funny because I'm not a very chirpy person. So
Yeah, are you so no family Disney World trips yet?
we're going tomorrow for the first
Are
time.
you
We're gonna
really?
go. We're gonna
Fantastic.
go to Disney and experience it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's like a fourth culture unto its own.
extraterrestrial culture. Really, it's kind of a
That's
weird
right.
place, but yeah.
That's right. All right, so you kind of feel this tug in high school. You're overseas. Yeah, what are some things that you feel like in particular or formative just for your faith and walk with Jesus that maybe you got via living overseas that maybe we miss out on here, whether it is a more of a global perspective, your kind of insights on how the Great Commission is being lived out and impacted in other places, to maybe kind of bring some awareness and insights to those of us that have only ever been stateside.
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk for an hour on this. So one way to kind of bring it together is, and one of the things that I learned living overseas is that the world is a very big place, right?
Okay.
And sometimes, but the world is also very small. And so I'll explain. So the world is very big in the sense that as soon as you feel like you feel comfortable and you feel like you understand your world, moving overseas breaks that, and you realize, oh my gosh, I don't understand anything. Right. And the world feels like endless people, endless culture, endless challenges, endless languages, endless obstacles. And it just is overwhelming.
Yeah.
I mean, I've learned, I think, 5 languages in my life.
My goodness.
And I've forgotten 6 or 7 is what I feel like, just forgotten pretty much everything I've learned. But I've learned them to conversational or fluency. So every time you learn a language, you realize, I don't know anything. This world is just like, how do you operate? So you go through all that. At the same time, the world is very small. So as soon as you kind of, sometimes we're like, man, I could never go there. It's so different, right? It's just over there. Even the term overseas is a reference to the fact that we're like on one side of the seas and they're on the other.
Right.
But it's funny because we say people go to Mexico, go overseas. People go to Latin America, they go overseas. Well, you could drive to Peru if you want, But like they are the ones overseas and we're the ones on native land.
Yeah.
Right? Wouldn't it be funny to hear like a Senegalese refer to going to America as going overseas? Like, yeah, I went overseas. Oh, really? You went to Africa? No, I went to the United States of America. Wait, what? We're not the overseas. You are.
Yeah.
So the world is very. Sometimes we get hooked into our kind of native systems of communication and relationships, so on. We forget that whereas the world is very big, we tend to make our world very small.
Okay.
And find our rhythms in our world. It's like grocery store, work, home, gym, and that's a reality that's universal. So that's comforting because pretty much everyone in the world has that kind of experience.
Okay.
So, man, learned a lot about the church and about the kingdom, a lot about how little I know and how little I can do anything. Sometimes I share that I had a good friend who is a Brazilian, and he was a super effective church planner in the Muslim world in Asia. Uber effective, impressively effective. He went home to Brazil and he was doing mobilization work during COVID.
Okay.
And it blew up. Loads of people getting mobilized for the kingdom and for the nations, and the gospel and so on. So now he becomes like the conference speaker in Brazil, right? He is like the go-to guy, every platform, and he's just rallying the troops and giving these impressive talks and so on. But then he moves back to Asia, I won't tell you where, but in Asia. And I asked him a couple of years ago, I said, why'd you do that, man? I mean, why did you move? You had such a thriving ministry in Brazil. Your voice was so powerful. Why did you move back to the middle of nowhere in Asia? And he said, man, in Brazil, I began to convince myself that I could move to Asia and in 2 weeks win the whole Muslim world to Christ. Because that's how it feels when you're doing mobilization. And I have to share with people, after a certain number of times of sharing the gospel to the Muslim, you realize you really literally cannot do anything to win them to Christ. So there's a very humbling experience of trying to make a difference in very tough places. That's good for me, good for the soul. And, it levels out humanity. You become kingdom oriented. You love your local church, but you just realize, my word, God loves his bride, and the bride is so much bigger than my corner of the kingdom of God. And we get really hyped up about our little corner of the kingdom of God. You know what I mean? And we get really passionate about our corner. Sure. And I always tell people, I say, if you think about a Broadway theater or like a performing arts theater, where you sit in the stands will determine what you see on the stage.
Yeah, that's good.
And that's why when you buy a ticket, they often show it. So I was telling you, one of the benefits of going overseas, of moving, is you change your seats in the theater of life. And you see the same thing very differently. So wonderful experience, very privileged, and I hope others get to have that experience too.
So, mention others have that experience. Obviously, short-term missions has been a pretty consistent Western church, program for a long time. I'm going to dive into your time at Austin Stone, because in my time with Andy, which I'm assuming he inherited, some of this thought or philosophy from you, or y'all are collaborators on this. The way that you would train to prepare people to go over was pretty unique from what I was used to back then in 2013 through 16, which was our first time out here, in the sense that you start trying to kind of live here stateside in a rhythm that will be at least somewhat similar to a team rhythm if you were to to move to another country. Can you talk a little bit about your perspective on that and training and actually preparation for those that
Mhm.
might be sensing the Lord's nudge in that direction?
Yeah. Well, the idea is experiential training um, for going to the mission field. So you want to experience it in as much as you learn about it. Learning about it's important. The books are important. Education's important. But you need both education and training. So you need to do it, right? Getting on a plane changes nothing about who you
Hmm.
are. So we hear that a lot, and it's really true.
Hmm.
Um, you can change the coffee shop you go to, but you can't change how you interact with the people at the coffee shop, right? So um, what we want to do in mobilization is train people to live here like they will live there. That's, but the funny thing is, you're actually just discipling people.
Yeah.
And that's where mobilization kind of,
Mm.
mobilization is really just about discipling people. So what do you do when you're trying to move to the mission field that you really don't or shouldn't or can't do when you're just living as a disciple locally? There are some things, right? Learn how to learn a language,
Yeah.
maybe, or learn how to survive in a toxic environment, like toxic air, toxic food, all these. But there are a lot of things that are the same patterns, practices, and principles of disciple making,
Yeah.
lifestyle of disciple making, how to share the gospel, how to start a Bible study, how to open a conversation, how to have a conversation, how to share the gospel, how to lead people from when they accept Christ to being a fully devoted follower of Christ. Man, all these things are what we're supposed to learn in the church,
Sure.
right? And as a Christian, those are the things you're supposed to do in another country.
Mm.
So the training at Stone is built with those kinds of principles in mind. I haven't been part of the Stone for a while, so I can't speak on behalf of them. But when I was there, and still, that's core to how they're thinking about training. Biblically, I'm often inspired. I've been inspired for many years about the men of Cyprus and Cyrene, right?
Okay.
So they were part of the church. They were part of planting. They were the seed of the gospel in Antioch.
Mm.
So the church of Antioch sent out Paul and Barnabas, right?
Right. Right.
Acts 13, and became pretty much the core missional sending church of the New
Yeah.
Testament
Absolutely.
church, right?
Yeah.
It was planted. The first planters were men, probably women or children, who we don't even know their name.
Mm.
We don't know anything about them other than they were sent, pretty much left because the persecution over Stephen. And in Acts 11, it just says the men of Cyprus and Cyrene went because of the persecution of Stephen, and they went preaching the gospel, right?
Right.
And that's how the church started. So there's a place for specialist missionaries, for
Okay.
sure. I really
Yeah.
believe that. Bible translation would be a great example. We need people really trained, faithful translation. Seminary, theological education, pastoral leadership. But there's also a place for just a bunch of men and women of Cyrene. And so Cyrene's in North Africa, so I like that. But I'm just a man from Cyrene, and my wife's just a woman from Cyrene in that respect. And
Mm.
most people who go to the mission field are like that.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's kind of core the training philosophy that I think Stone has, very important, and it's a high value of the priesthood of believer.
Okay.
So a lot of times we don't know what that means. We just think everyone's got kind of the spirit, we're all empowered, whatever. But if we're really all empowered with the same apostolic DNA of the gospel,
Mm.
what does that mean for what we can do and what disciple making looks like? So, yeah.
And I know you're not speaking on behalf of all of evangelicalism, but I do want your perspective from your experience, effectiveness. The Lord's really used you. Your dad's meant a lot to me, so I've just got a lot of trust and affection in your family's direction. But I've done all of my ministry stateside. I mean, I've been over, done training
Mm-hmm.
trips, been to Serbia five,
Mm-hmm.
6 times, and kind of made that a target area as far as
Mm-hmm.
training and teaching goes. But from your perspective of living other places and looking back at kind of how the church is fleshing out programmatically, what's your assessment on mobilization, on training, especially discipleship training or Downline. That's kind of the whole reason we exist, is to equip men and women. And then, do you agree? And this is open-ended question. I'm not coming from any angle. There is a vein of thought that everyone should go unless you're supernaturally called to stay, which kind of inverts the thought of, right, we should stay unless you're supernaturally called to go. I would love your thoughts. I know I threw a lot at you right there, but do you have any thoughts or insights on kind of the way we think through that from our Western American perspective?
Yeah. I could really, yeah, that's a great question. And a lot to share. So, I think in the West, in the Western church, sometimes we forget that our ecclesiology flows from our missiology. This is kind of how I've tried to explain it. I've written some books and stuff, and so I've thought about how do I explain some of the perspective that the Lord's developed in me, as well as many others. And this is one way, is that our theology should always be missiologically applied, and our missiology should always be theologically founded, right?
Okay.
And construed. Well, if you think about it, the church exists because of the mission. So God is a missionary God, and because of that, the church.
The church
Right?
is both. Sure. Okay.
Yeah, and so it's not the reverse. And it's when we get it in reverse that we can start to have a lot of problems. So when you start to believe that the church, in one sense, the church is the plan, right? Because the bride. And that's the plan. But the bride is pursued by the groom. The bride is won over by the groom. The bride is bought by the groom. And so this is not to devalue the church. It's to put the church in its proper missiological orientation. The church exists because of the mission. It didn't exist for most of creation. It didn't exist for most of existence. It's a unique time and place, and exists because God is a missionary God. So if you start to say, well, the church is the point, and so the church has a mission thing, what generally happens is you forget that mission is not the same thing as missions.
Okay, draw that distinction for our people.
Well, it's just a sticky way a sticky, zinger to kind of say something complex. In our American parlance, missions generally refers to like a church's missions department,
Sure.
or a missions program,
or a trip,
right?
Short-term trip,
or a trip. We're going to go to Serbia. We're going to go. We're going to adopt a school in the city. We're going to do our missions thing, and then we're going to go home and not do our missions thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to go back to our house, our neighborhood, not be, because the missions thing was going to the school in the inner city, right, or feeding the poor, right? That was the mission's expensive time. But and that's fine. In our language, that's how we talk about it. Mission is we can't. Mission is our whole life as a believer. When we're called into being a disciple, we inherit the mission, because we inherit the Spirit is poured into us, Romans 5, and the Spirit is the generator and sustainer and empowerer of God's mission. And the Spirit never is not on mission.
Sure.
Ever. And so if we're indwelled by the Spirit, we're always compelled by mission and live for mission. And our whole existence is wrapped into this bigger thing called the mission. Acts 17, 26 and 27. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to dwell on the earth, having established the boundaries of their habitation and their times and places, that's
right,
they may know God, that they may find him, search after him, though he's not far from any of us. So our entire existence is for the mission. So, man, I could talk about a lot of just critiques and, but having been a part of a lot of churches in a lot of parts of the world, I'm kind of just yeah, we could critique everyone and they could critique us. Being critique worthy is a common denominator of all churches in all places. So I don't find that as worthwhile, but to say, and really not my place, but to say, the beautiful thing about the church is because of the indwelling Spirit, the church indwelt with the Spirit will find itself either in repentance for not being on mission, or in complacency and ignoring mission, or on mission. But you can't ever remove mission from the core DNA of God's church.
Mm-hmm.
That gives a lot of hope for us who are involved with churches, because it's hard, you know.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's my world, and I the critique worthy thing certainly fits. Yeah, I can wear both those shoes.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this though, and follow up to that. You got a man or woman, they're building into someone. Maybe they lead someone to the Lord. However, whatever the Spirit's doing. Your perspective on, should we be pushing missions, right? Should we be pushing the mission, which means let's train and equip and send and send and send. We want to be a sending church. We want to be a sending church. All of these things. Or are you waiting for someone that the Spirit is drawing to articulate that, and then you're kind of going, okay, you're the person, now we're going to train you? Is it a both and? What do you see as most effective as far as the people that actually go?
Yeah. Well, all the above.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Acts 13, while they were seeking the Spirit in prayer and fasting, the Lord set apart Paul and Barnabas, right? And one of the theological questions that the theologians and missiologists kind of debate over is, who sent Paul and Barnabas? Was it the church, or was it the Spirit?
It was the Spirit.
In Acts 13, 1 through 3. And it's kind of like that, we plant seed, and farmer goes out and works all day, and then goes to bed, wakes up, and he sees a field of a cultivated field, and says, how did that happen? And he doesn't know, So all the above. Sometimes in pastoral ministry, you're looking for those who God has set apart, as you're in prayer, as you're in fasting, as you're seeking the Spirit, like in that Acts 13, you're looking for the Acts 13 moment, right?
Right.
But sometimes you're not, and people just come along. Mark, where did Mark come from? Right? John Mark. So Acts 13, 1 through 3, you see Paul and Barnabas being commissioned, and the Spirit saying them, and then they pick up John Mark on the way. Was it Barnabas' cousin? Was that right?
I think it's his cousin, yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of see that, it's not right to create a paradigm out of that, but it's helpful. Like, okay, sometimes people are just John Marks, and they just kind of get picked up into they just join the stream of people going, and they figure it out. And, sometimes they end up going back home. That ticks off the apostolic leaders like Paul, But that's common, right? And sometimes it's people like the church has appointed and sent out. Can they do different roles? Of course, we need to apply wisdom to that. But in terms of a local church, I think the pastor needs to have both in each hand. One, intentional development and appointing and commissioning of apostolically sent people.
Okay.
Two, responding to the Spirit's work. Typically an apostolic person, apostolic meaning that they're being sent out for the mission, apostolos, they have a gravitational pull, generally, like Paul and Barnabas and then Mark. So typically they'll have a gravitational pull, and pastors need to have that on the other hand of openness to, it wasn't in the plan, and we didn't develop them like the other guys, but under those guys' leadership, it works. And so let's be open to where the Spirit's working. That's kind of how I think of it.
Yeah.
That's not to say it's right or wrong. It's just perspective.
So what do you, I know we got a few more minutes here. I'd really be curious your thoughts on this. Maybe you meet a younger believer, maybe somebody in their 20s, maybe an older, who knows? And they're processing, should we uproot our life and do what Joey did and go and live and root down? And for some, maybe that's a romantic notion of living overseas. Maybe it's a good God, but give our folks some real pragmatic, reflective questions to ask themselves or process with others. That's maybe through a grid of discernment as far as, yes or no on that. Or do you go, we need anybody over there that'll go. Let's just, sign up and go here.
Yeah, sometimes it is that, but I would counsel just general discerning God's will. So you need to, in order of priority and importance and weight, the Bible first. So spend a lot of time seeking the Bible, and you're going to be surprised on what it says. I'll give you an example. One time I was really afraid to stay in the location I was in because it was super dangerous. Okay. And I felt that the Bible teaches, press on, be bold, And then the Lord led me in a normal quiet time on a normal day to where the father of Jesus, Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, Joseph, didn't want to go back to Palestine because he was afraid of the leadership there, right?
Yeah.
And God was okay with that. Okay.
Mm.
And that's how he got to Nazareth. And Jesus is called the one who came from Nazareth.
From Nazareth.
Like the scripture really works when you're seeking God and praying. And I just really don't mean that in a cliche way. It really works. So that's first, the Bible.
But Joey, let me interrupt you on that. Even within that, though, is a hermeneutical perspective. You're actually coming expecting God to speak to you, not just digest kind of like a distant doctrine, if that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. I love the Lord because he's heard my voice. He's heard my cry for mercy and turned his ear to me.
Mm-hmm.
I love God for that reason. He's heard my voice. He's heard my cry. He is literally, one of his names is the God who hears.
Hears, that's right.
Yeah. So totally, absolutely. You need to expect God to individually and particularly speak to you by means of his word. That's why it's precious, as well as speak to the church. Secondly, the counsel of your community with emphasis on your spiritual leaders. So the Bible to discern. Secondly, should you go, should you stay? Counsel of your community with emphasis on your spiritual leaders. So all your friends can say one thing and your elders say another thing. Go with your elders. Okay. Or your pastor, or whoever your spiritual leadership is. Third thing would be circumstances. Trust the counsel of circumstances. Okay. That's rooted in God's promises. So God's sovereignty, his providence, in God's providence, that kind of Acts 17, what I quoted, verse, Jesus Christ holds all things together. And so, we can trust to an extent, but that's third in line. So it's not always reliable. Paul, when Paul went to 2 Corinthians 1, Paul went to Troas and he said, the Lord, this is amazing, by the way, the Lord opened a door of ministry for him. Yet he didn't feel comfortable because Titus wasn't there. He wanted to be with Titus. So he left. All right? Well, that's incredible. And there's no indication he was wrong. So circumstances are important, but they're not determinative. Sometimes a door opens, you go through it. Sometimes the door is closed and you go through it. Part of apostolic ministry is pounding doors down that are closed. Okay. So just because the door is closed is not determinative on whether you should go or not. Some people say, I will only go if there's a job for me. Well, that's fine. But sometimes people go and say, it doesn't matter what job for me is there, I'm going. So that's right. Fourth and final, your emotions. Your gut feeling, your gut impulse. That's important. The Spirit is inside of you. The Spirit speaks to you. God leads you and speaks. Whether it's a dream, a desire, an emotion. You cried when you were 16, you cried because you saw some picture of some kids in some country. Okay, that's important. It's part of how God shapes us. It's not as important as the other things I've mentioned. So I would say those practically, what I would do is take those 4 questions. What does the Bible say? What's the counsel of my community say? Trust the community with emphasis on spiritual leaders. What does my circumstances say? And what is my gut impulse? Take 4 of those things, rank them, put weight on them proportionally, and then see if you can work through in that way a discernment process of where God's leading you. And bring others into that. So you can kind of chart it out if you want or whatever. Bring your community into that, your elders into that. Let them work through with you. But historically speaking, that's kind of a classical way of discerning God's will. It's super practical. I've done it.
Yeah. I love that.
So, yeah.
I love that. Is incredibly helpful. Okay. Last thing, you mentioned you've written some, you really thought about a lot of stuff. If people want to find your stuff, dig in, learn more about this, can you tell them, what that is and where they can find it? And by the way, he didn't ask me to do this, so I'm putting him on the spot.
Yeah. I don't put a lot of time into my online presence, but, I do have a website where I publish my poetry, if they're interested, jshaw.online, jshaw.online. So I've published my poetry. I think I linked to the books I've been a part of there in my biography section. Fantastic. You can follow the ministry I lead. I serve with, I'm the executive vice president, so I lead it in partnership with the president and in submission to him. But global gacx.io, and they can find my bio there. They could check out, some of the thinking I've kind of given. I wrote into a book called All Authority.
Okay.
Reference to the Great Commission. It's called All Authority. Find it wherever books are sold.
I love that.
And it's in Spanish and English.
Okay.
For those who, would rather read in Spanish, they can find it published by, the English is published by B&H Publishing. The Spanish is by Andamio. So, Toda Autoridad, for those who want to look for it in Spanish.
Hey, thank you so much for your time and jumping on with us. I found this super helpful and insightful and encouraging.
Thanks, brother. Thank you.
All right. See you. I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of the Downline podcast. Please subscribe and go down and rate us and give us 5 stars. Help us get this content out to as many people as possible, as we hope to continue to equip men and women to join the Great Commission and make disciples for a lifestyle as a lifetime.